The caravan moved slowly across the endless desert under the scorching sun. The camels walked at a steady pace, swaying the heavy loads on their backs, while the guide Munir walked confidently ahead, watching the road and directing the animals. Everything looked calm and familiar for a desert route. Suddenly, a strong wind rose from the horizon, lifting clouds of sand into the air. The sandstorm quickly intensified, and the caravan found itself surrounded by clouds of dust. Munir raised his hand, trying to hold back the animals and people, but the sand blinded his eyes, and each step became more dangerous. In the thick of the sandstorm, one of the young camels sank into the quicksand. Now its body was almost completely hidden under the sand, only its head stuck out, mooing anxiously and jerking its neck. The more it tried to get out, the deeper it sank, and it became clear that it would not get out without help. Munir stood next to the camel, which was almost completely buried in the sand, and wasted no time in taking out his satellite radio. The wind was still blowing sand around, but he clearly transmitted the coordinates and shouted into the radio that the animal was sinking into the quicksand and only its head remained above the surface. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that every minute counted. At that moment, the operator on duty at the Serengeti Rescue Center picked up the phone and immediately understood that this was a critical situation. He clarified the location, recorded the coordinates, and without wasting a second, sounded the alarm. A voice rang out down the corridor. "Quicksand! Camel almost completely buried. Urgent dispatch." The rescuers quickly got up from their seats. 3 rescuers began to gather around the jeep. One checked the strong ropes and wide straps for securing the animal. The second packed shovels, wooden shields, and metal plates for support on the sand. And the third inspected the car, wide tires, fuel supply, and water. In a matter of minutes, everything necessary was loaded into the jeep. The engine started, and the team was ready to head out into the desert. The rescue service jeep raced across the desert, its wheels cutting through the hot sand. The sun's heat blinded their eyes, the wind rustled against the bodywork, and ropes, shovels, and water canisters bounced around inside. The rescuers in orange and beige suits sat tensely, listening to the coordinates on the radio. The closer they got, the more anxious they felt. Finally, the jeep reached its destination. It stopped right next to the caravanners, who were standing in a semicircle near the sandy pit. The rescuers got out of the car. A frightening sight met their eyes. Only the camel's head was sticking out of the sand, the rest of its body completely buried by the dune. The people frantically pointed to where it had fallen. The rescuers quickly assessed the situation, laid out their equipment, and prepared for the rescue. One of the rescuers cautiously approached the camel. The animal was breathing heavily, its lips parched with thirst. He took out a metal flask, gently lifted the camel's head, and began to give it small sips of water. Other rescuers held its head and tried to calm the animal. The caravan drivers watched with hope. Help had finally arrived. The rescuers didn't waste a second. They knelt down next to the camel and began carefully digging their shovels into the hot, crumbling sand. Every movement was precise. They couldn't touch the animal. Sand flew in all directions, first exposing the camel's neck, then its shoulders and part of its back. The sun beat down mercilessly. The wind brought hot gusts of sand, but no one stopped. The camel was breathing heavily, its ears trembling with anxiety, but it seemed to be beginning to understand that it was being rescued. When most of its body became visible, the team acted even more cautiously. One of the rescuers took out strong ropes, while others supported the camel's head so that it would not hurt itself if it suddenly jerked. The ropes were gently placed around its chest and belly and tightened slowly so as not to cause pain. The caravan drivers stood nearby, one stroking the camel's muzzle and whispering something soothing. At that moment, there was complete silence over the desert. Only the breathing of people and the wind blowing the sand could be heard. When everything was ready, the rescuers attached the ropes to metal cables stretched from the jeep. The driver started the engine. The motor roared loudly, and the cables tightened. The sand around the camel began to shift, like a living mass, and the animal slowly began to rise. Everyone watched with bated breath. A little more, and the camel would be completely out of the trap. But it was important not to rush so as not to harm it. When the camel was completely pulled out of the sand trap, it stood on weak legs, trembling with exhaustion. Rescuers held it by the side so that it would not fall. Sand was still falling from its coat, and its eyes were half closed from exhaustion and the bright sun. One of the rescuers brought soft brushes, and the team began to gently clean the sand from the animal's head, neck, and hump. The caravan drivers stood nearby. Some held water, others stroked the camel, trying to calm it down. Gradually, it began to breathe more evenly, blinked several times, and raised its head slightly. In the second row, rescuers brought water and wet towels to wipe the sand dust from the animal's eyes and muzzle. The camel drank slowly, in large gulps, the water dripping from its lips back onto the hot sand. The brushes glided gently over its coat, removing the last of the dust, and soon the camel's hump and side were clearly visible again. The jeep was standing nearby. The ropes had already been removed, the wind had died down, and the desert seemed to freeze, watching this rescue. The people looked at each other. The danger had passed. The caravan drivers approached the rescuers, some even kneeling on one knee to express their gratitude. The leader of the caravan, an elderly man with a scarf on his head, shook each rescuer's hand firmly, saying that without them, their camel would have died, and with it, their entire journey. The camel stood nearby, tired but calm. Its coat had been cleaned of sand, there was no more dry dust around its eyes, and its breathing had become more even. One of the rescuers quietly stroked the animal's neck, while the other checked the ropes on the packs to make sure everything was secure. At that moment, the desert became especially quiet, as if nature itself was watching how people had saved a life in a place where often only the strongest survive. After a few minutes of rest, the caravan set off again. The people adjusted the shadows from their scarves, raised their staffs, and the camel cautiously took its first confident steps on the soft sand. The rescuers stood next to their jeep, dust on the wheels, sparkling metal cables, empty water canisters in the trunk. They watched silently as the caravan receded until the figures of people and camels became small silhouettes on the horizon. Then one of the rescuers said briefly, "Let's go." The jeep slowly turned around and headed back to base, leaving behind a trail of tire tracks that would soon be erased by the wind. Sometimes, even in the most merciless desert, there's room for human kindness. A life saved is a reminder that even amidst sand and storms, the world rests on those who don't pass by. Subscribe and help us give more animals a second chance. See you next time.